I'd like to call this hearing to order, and I'd like to welcome our witnesses today. Vice Admiral Joseph Maguire, President Trump's nominee for Director of the National Counterterrorism Center, and Elaine McCarthy, President Trump's nominee for Assistant Secretary for Intelligence and Research. Congratulations to both of you on your nominations, and I want to thank both of you for your years of honorable service to the United States. I'd like to start by recognizing the family that you've brought with you today. Vice Admiral Maguire, I understand you have your wife, Kathy, soon to do some intervention this afternoon at
Yes, Chairman.
house shopping.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
As well as your daughter, Catherine, your son, Dan, and your daughter-in-law, Jackie. Welcome to all of you. Ms. McCarthy, I believe you have your husband, Gordon. He's been through similar of these before, and we're thankful. He's here along with your children, Liam
and Eileen.
And your mother-in-law, Dawn Hannah. Welcome to all of you. I want to thank you for the support of these nominees. I'm confident that they would not be here if it wasn't for your years of encouragement and potentially, more importantly, your patience. Our goal in conducting this hearing is to enable the committee to consider Vice Admiral Maguire's and Ms. McCarthy's qualifications and to allow for thoughtful deliberation by our members. The witnesses each have already provided substantive written responses to numerous questions presented by the committee and its members. Today, of course, members will be able to ask additional questions and hear directly from the nominees. Vice Admiral Maguire graduated from Manhattan College and received his master's degree from the Naval Postgraduate School. He then served 36 years in the United States Navy as Navy Special Warfare Officer. During that time, he commanded at every level, serving as a commanding officer of the Naval Special Warfare Center and SEAL Team 2, as well as with the Naval Special Warfare Command. From 2007-2010, Vice Admiral Maguire served as the Deputy Director for Strategic and Operational Planning at NCTC. Following his government service, he served as the Vice President at Booz Allen's, leading Booz Allen's efforts to support the Special Operations community. The Vice Admiral currently serves as the President and CEO of the Special Operation Warriors Foundation. Thank you for that, Admiral. Ms. McCarthy earned her undergraduate degree from the University of South Carolina and her master's degree in public policy from the University of Maryland. Earlier in her career, Ms. McCarthy served as an intelligence research specialist for the United States Atlantic Command, the Chief of Intelligence Operations and Policies for the United States Coast Guard, and then as Director of Human Capital Management in the Human Capital Management Office in the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence. Ms. McCarthy served as the President of the Intelligence and National Security Alliance from 2008 till 2012, and then as the Chief Operating Officer of the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency from 12 to 15. Ms. McCarthy currently serves as the Vice President for Intelligence Analytics at Noblus, an independent nonprofit science and technology organization that serves federal law enforcement and intelligence agency clients. Vice Admiral Maguire, you've been asked to lead the NCTC at a time when we're facing threats from state and non-state actors alike while we're engaged in a robust debate at home on the scope and scale of intelligence collection and what authorities are right, appropriate, and lawful. I trust that you'll speak truth to power as the Director of National Intelligence works through some incredibly and complex and divisive issues. Ms. McCarthy, it's important that the leader at the State Department's intelligence community component engage in ongoing and substantive work with the rest of the intelligence community. I trust that your leadership of INR will only increase that collaboration and improve its contribution to the IC. The committee will ask both to be responsive, transparent, and timely in our interactions. These are absolutely necessary conditions for us to conduct effective and real-time oversight. As I've mentioned to other nominees during their confirmation hearing, I can assure you that this committee will continue to faithfully follow its charter and conduct vigorous and real-time oversight over the intelligence community, its operations, and its activities. We will ask difficult and probing questions of you and your staff and we expect honest, complete, and timely responses. I enjoyed meeting with both of you and discussing your qualifications and reasons for pursuing public service. I'm confident in your ability to lead NCTC and INR, and I look forward to supporting your nominations and ensuring their consideration without delay. I want to thank both of you again for being here, for your years of service to our country, and I look forward to your testimony. I'll now recognize the Vice Chairman for any comments he might like to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to echo your comments and welcome our nominees. Vice Admiral Maguire, it's good to see you. I enjoyed our visit. Ms. McCarthy, welcome as well. You've both been nominated to the most important positions in the intelligence community at obviously a critical juncture for our country. You both have long and impressive records of achievement, and I applaud your willingness to once again provide public service. The NCTC is the IC's top organization for tracking and countering the continuing threat from terrorism. We know that we still have many men and women on the front line in the fights against terrorism, and it only takes one slip up for awful things to happen. As we discussed, Admiral, though, your job and your ability to do your job is going to be only as good as your ability to maintain strong relationship with our allies and partners. And obviously, during this time period when it appears at times our president is more interested in punching our adversaries and allies, or punching our allies in the nose rather than our adversaries, I think building those relationships and keeping them strong is going to be terribly important. Ms. McCarthy, the State Department's Bureau of Intelligence and Research is a small but critical component of the IC. One only has to think back to the intelligence assessments on Iraq's WMD to recall that it was INR that urged a note of caution during that time. And truth was, INR was right and most of the rest of the community was wrong. And again, it's going to be very important that you continue to provide that support for the men and women who serve in the State Department all around the world. One of the things about this committee, and so proud of, is that we do work in a common pattern, but one of the things that I'm going to look for from both of you is an ironclad commitment that the men and women who will be working for both of you will be empowered to continue to assess and analyze intelligence upon which our nation depends, free from political interference. We've talked about this in the past. It is more important than ever that the intelligence community feels they have the freedom to speak truth to power. Now, challenges may be if the power doesn't listen to the truth at this point, but our job is still to make sure truth to power, regardless of any other considerations. And that is again made more difficult when unfortunately this White House, if they're not punching our allies, occasionally seems to be undermining the integrity of our intelligence community, which I think is quite different. I'm also concerned with some of the President's recent actions in terms of threatening to remove security clearances from former intelligence officials, what appears to be simply based upon their exercising their First Amendment rights. The truth is, again, the IC, which has always been valued with its independence, cannot give in to that kind of political pressure or manipulation. And I'm going to be, again, trying to get you both on the record to make sure that both of you, and that the men and women who work for you will maintain that independence. Finally, I just want to note for the record that tomorrow, July 26th, will be the 6th year in a row that I and all of my colleagues on this committee will honor the men and women who serve in silence in the agencies and components of the intelligence community. Tomorrow will mark 71 years since President Truman signed into law the National Security Act of 1947, which formed the basis for today's IC. It's a small token what we do tomorrow in terms of a resolution from Congress recognizing that service, but since so many of these men and women who work for you will always have to serve in some degree of anonymousness, it is important that those of us in Congress put forward that message, recognizing the IC professionals for the enormous job they do each and every day to keep our nation straight and secure. Again, I want to thank both of you for your willingness to step forward. We look forward to this hearing and look forward to supporting your nominations as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Vice Chairman. Vice Admiral, Ms. McCarthy, would you please stand? and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear to give the committee the truth, the full truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Please be seated. Before we move to your statements, I'll ask you to answer 5 standard questions the committee poses to each nominee who appears before us. They're just a simple yes or no answer for the record. Do both of you agree to appear before the committee here and in other venues when invited?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Chairman.
If confirmed, do you agree to send officials from your office to appear before the committee and designate staff when invited?
Yes, Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Do you agree to provide documents or any other materials requested by the committee in order for us to carry out our oversight and legislative responsibilities?
Yes, Mr.
Yes,
Chairman.
Mr. Chairman.
Will you both ensure that your office and your staff provide such materials to the committee when requested?
Yes, sir.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Do you agree to inform and fully brief to the fullest extent possible all members of the committee of the intelligence activities and covert actions rather than only the chair and vice chairman?
Yes, Mr.
Yes,
Chairman.
Mr. Chairman.
I want to thank you very much for that. We'll now proceed to your opening statements, after which I'll recognize members by seniority for up to 5 minutes of questions. Vice Admiral Maguire, I'll ask you to begin, followed by Ms. McCarthy. Vice Admiral, the floor is yours.
Yes, sir. Chairman Burr, Vice Chairman Warner, members of the committee, thank you very much for this opportunity to appear before you this morning. I'd like to add my own special thanks and appreciation to the efforts of the committee staffers, as well as many officers at ODNI and NCTC. I've recently become very aware that there's a tremendous amount of work that goes into a confirmation hearing. Mr. Chairman, I realize that all prior nominees to be the director of the National Counterterrorism Center were well known to this committee when they appeared before here for their nomination, having served as either acting directors of NCTC or at time of their responsibility within the federal government. I'm honored to appear before this committee today to introduce myself and discuss my credentials. But first, I'd like to once again, sir, take a moment to recognize my family. As you said, my son Dan and my daughter-in-law Jackie from Chicago, my daughter Catherine who lives in Tampa. In addition to that, I'd also like to recognize one of my daughters from a military family, Kelly McCraven, who is here, the daughter of Admiral and Mrs. Bill McCraven. While I was in uniform, my children lived in Virginia, California, Massachusetts, Hawaii, and Florida, and some of those states in multiple times. They too have served and given much to our country. Last, my wife, Kathy. She's guided and supported me for 42 years. Kathy raised our children during my many and long deployments and dedicated her life to serving the men and women of our armed forces and families. For the 3 years that I was assigned to NCTC, Kathy met every single special operator who was severely wounded when they arrived at either Walter Reed or Bethesda Naval Hospital, sometimes in the middle of the night. Then Secretary of Defense Robert Gates awarded Kathy the Department of Defense Medal for Distinguished Public Service for her support to hundreds of wounded service members and their families. And she did this throughout our career. Although I was the one in uniform for 36 years, she served too. Mr. Chairman, I come from a community where service above self is expected, and there is no greater honor than to be asked to lead. So when offered the opportunity to return to government service as the director of NCTC, there was no other answer than yes. I'm honored by the trust and confidence of the President and the Director of National Intelligence in my ability to serve our nation's counterterrorism enterprise. Few Americans have had the privilege that I have this morning. I want to thank you for considering my nomination to be the next director of the National Counterterrorism Center, and if confirmed, pledge to be transparent, collaborative with this committee and members of Congress. It was my distinct privilege to serve as the Deputy Director of Strategic Operational Planning when NCTC was led by Director Scott Redd and Mike Leiter. From my experience working in the interagency and the eventual successes we had, I'm convinced that winning this counterterrorism fight can only be achieved through a coordinated and synchronized whole-of-government approach. I look to the example of my friend Admiral Bill McCraven, a Joint Special Operations Command, or JSOC commander, during the raid on Osama bin Laden's compound in Abbottabad. This highly sensitive operation was not only an intelligence community and Defense Department campaign, but in truth, It was the result of a disciplined interagency process. Looking back over the last 17 years since September 11th, 2001, the United States, working with our partners and allies, has made tremendous progress in our ability to detect and disrupt multi-actor, sophisticated terrorist attacks. We've built a robust counterterrorism apparatus that has significantly increased our ability to protect the homeland, as well as share valuable information within our own government and our global partners. However, significant challenges still remain, and the U.S. and our allies face an increasingly complex terrorism landscape that includes homegrown violent extremists, Sunni violent extremist groups such as ISIS and al-Qaeda, and Shia violent extremists backed by Iran. I think it's fair to say that we face more threats originating from more places and more individuals than we have had in the last 17 years. Given this threat environment, I'm committed to ensuring that NCTC and the broader IC remain vigilant, innovative, and adaptive as our adversaries are persistent. We've made great strides dismantling ISIS, al-Qaeda, and other terrorist organizations. However, the past 17 years have shown us that bullets and drone strikes alone are not sufficient to counter violent extremist organizations. To ultimately win this fight, we must address the causes and conditions that inspire men and women to join terrorist organizations and radicalize to violence. Mr. Chairman, I will bring all my energy and a sense of urgency to this position. Leadership experience in both government and industry, a reputation for speaking truth to power, trust, confidence, and personal relationships with many of our current national security leaders, and the ability to build a strong relationship. I will pursue a number of important priorities if confirmed as the Director of the National Counterterrorism Center, and I've outlined these priorities in my written statement for the record. And I look forward to discussing these issues with the committee in greater length in the future. Chairman Burr, Vice Chairman Warner, members of this committee, thank you very much for this opportunity. I look forward to your questions.
Vice Admiral, thank you. Ms. McCarthy, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Chairman Burr, Ranking Member Warner, members of the committee, I am truly honored to appear before you today. I'm so pleased to be joined by my family, my husband of over 22 years, Gordon Hanna, who's always been my biggest supporter and my best friend. We're joined by our remarkable children, Liam and Eileen Hanna, of whom I'm immensely proud. They inspire me to be a better person, a better citizen, and a better servant. But I also have to recognize my mother-in-law, my cousins, my coworkers, everybody who's standing behind me today. I thank you all for your continued support. I don't think I would be here without any one of you. Thank you. I also want to recognize my esteemed colleague, Admiral Joe Maguire, the nominee for Director of the National Counterterrorism Center, a true patriot who had an incredibly distinguished career in the Naval Special Warfare community and continues to serve today as the President and CEO of the Special Operations Foundation. Joe, I'm thrilled to spend this moment in time with you today. I also want to thank President Trump, Secretary Pompeo for their confidence and trust and for providing me the opportunity to again serve our country. If confirmed, I would be most proud to lead the women and the men of the Bureau of Intelligence and Research and to work with the agencies in the U.S. intelligence community in support of the mission of the State Department. Over the last few weeks, I've been asked by many, why would I want to return to government? The answer is quite simple. I'm motivated by service and working hard, and I'm passionate about the intelligence community and its role in securing this great nation. I also believe that if confirmed, my broad intelligence community experience and deep expertise in the business of intelligence can help the Bureau of Intelligence and Research grow its impact on the mission of the State Department. The call to serve and work ethic is embedded in my DNA. My father, a former tax attorney and college professor, worked literally until the day he died. He was a brilliant lawyer whose motivation was not salary, but helping people with their tax problems, or teaching and mentoring young people interested in pursuing degrees and careers in accounting and taxation. My mother to this day is always looking to the future and identifying things she can do to help, whether it's volunteering at the polls or serving in her local nursing home. Their experience inspired me to start working at the age of 13, and my first jobs included delivering newspapers, waiting tables, and tending bars. Self-actualization for me was doing a great job and making others happy. My passion for the intelligence community was almost immediate. I started as a Soviet submarine analyst during the Cold War and learned very quickly about the value of good intelligence. I'll never forget the feedback I received from a mission commander when he indicated that the mission was a success, in large part because of the support I had provided. That moment was absolutely cathartic, and it was the moment I was hooked. Even today, I want to be part of a community that informs policymakers, supports diplomats, warfighters, and law enforcement professionals, and helps them do their jobs better. If confirmed, I will bring with me the same desire, plus more than 30 years of service across the IC and the private sector. When I started in government in the late 1980s, people were hired by one organization, and there they pretty much stayed. My career followed a different path, one that has provided me a broad understanding of the IC as well as deep expertise in the business of intelligence, which includes requirements, budget, vision, strategy. I've spent a career taking organizations to a new level. In order, Senators, to stay within my time limit, I'm going to refer you to my statement for the record, which provides a snapshot of my accomplishments. But I hope in your review you'll see that I left every organization better than when I started, or at least I certainly tried. So I'm absolutely thrilled at the prospect of returning to government in support of Secretary Pompeo and the State Department, and will leverage my broad experience inside and outside government and the critical relations I have developed throughout my career. I'll place a special focus on growing INR's impact on the State Department mission. The Bureau of Intelligence and Research has a long and very proud history in providing in-depth, all-source analysis, intelligence, policy, and coordination, and analytic outreach that has guided our nation's foreign policy. With its unique mix of foreign service and civil service professionals, it really plays an outsized role in the intelligence community. If confirmed, I will work hard to ensure that INR continues to recruit and train the highest quality and diverse staff. It would be my first priority to provide them with the tools and resources they need to continue to provide value to the Secretary and Department policymakers. Equally important, I will vigorously defend the integrity of the analytic process to ensure independence and unbiased analysis, the INR brand. I'll be vigilant in that intelligence and sensitive intelligence-related law enforcement activities are consistent with and support our foreign policy and national security objectives. Finally, I will leverage my experience in the intelligence community, both inside and outside of government, to enhance INR's and the IC's analytic outreach efforts with a focus on building INR's well-established expertise in foreign policy and intelligence issues. So, Mr. Chairman, Vice Chairman, if confirmed, I'll bring extensive experience across the IC and the private sector, a passion to serve, and relevant skills to the position of Assistant Secretary for Intelligence and Research. I'll work tirelessly to ensure that INR continues to provide the President, the Secretary of State, and other senior policymakers with timely and independent intelligence analysis, and that our intelligence analysis activities support our foreign policy and national security objectives. With that, thank you for your consideration, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Ms. McCarthy, thank you. I didn't think that you could get a higher level of commitment from me because it was already high when you came in, but the bartender thing really got to me. I want to thank both of you for being here, for pursuing this request by the administration to serve your country in one more capacity. And at this time, I'd like to recognize Vice Chairman for questions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to also echo, you both bring remarkable talent, remarkable background and skills. But I do feel it's necessary, and Ms. McCarthy, you've already alluded to this, but we live in challenging and unusual times. And I need you both to state, again, clearly for the record, that should you be confirmed, that you'll make sure that the men and women who work for you, and for that matter, you in these leadership roles, will make sure that the opinions you render will be independent, will not be politically influenced, will not be guided by a White House who wants one answer versus what your analysts may come up with. Obviously, you both had records in this field, but I'd like you both to address that willingness again to speak truth to power. Admiral, first.
Well, Vice Chairman Warner, you know, to me, if confirmed as the director of the National Counterterrorism Center, and you know, for my 36 years in uniform, I've always believed it's loyalty up and loyalty down. So, although clearly the director of the National Counterterrorism Center is a political appointee nominated by the President, I don't think that there's anything political about the position. In addition to that, as a leader of the workforce, if the analysis indicates that it is what it is, I think that to do otherwise and color and shape the information to please other folks would be a disservice to them and to the nation. So I absolutely assure you that if the analysis from my workforce indicates that there's something that needs to be said, no matter what it is, I promise to tell the truth and to be able to represent the information and the hard analysis from the intelligence community professionals as accurately and as forthcoming as I possibly can. And I am more than willing to speak truth to power.
Thank you. Ms. McCarthy.
Senator, I make this promise to always provide truth to power, and so will my workforce. I will tell you that I have a long career of working across the government for folks from many parties who've taken on many positions, and I'm proud to say that I've always given them the truth. Just a short story, I started my career in naval intelligence, and I'll never forget my first briefing to a Navy captain who wanted something that I wasn't going to be able to provide him. And I'll tell you, that moment sort of sealed in me that the importance of providing truth to this captain who might as well have been the Pope. But I gave him my best analysis. I had the support of my leadership, and from that moment on, that's all I've ever provided. That's all we will continue to provide.
Well, I have confidence in both of you in that, but I did, in these very strange times, it's important to get that on the record. Admiral, in your previous roles, both at NCTC and as head of Navy SEALs and Naval Special Ops, and I think we talked about this a little bit in our visit, you understand the importance of strong alliances. Obviously, in NCTC, you have a remarkable, your operation will have remarkable capabilities, but again, if we're going to keep America safe, you're going to have to rely upon tips and information as well from allies and partners around the world. Again, in normal times, I wouldn't have to ask this question, but can you speak to that need of maintaining those alliances, those relationships, and how, in light of the fact that at the political level, there may be some challenges where we seem to have a White House that sometimes treats our allies as adversaries and adversaries as friends, but can you speak to the importance of those special relationships in terms of this new task you'll have as permanent director of the NCTC?
Yes, Vice Chairman Warner, you know, being a military guy and having some experience, I've always felt that you can't have too many friends on the battlefield. And right now, with the counterterrorism battlefield, we really need to have all of our partners and allies. I think that for our NATO allies that we've a long-established relationship with, counterterrorism and terrorism is not new to the Europeans. We really only become very, very sensitive to this after 9/11. But I remember in the 70s and the 80s with the Red Army faction and Bonner-Meinhof and all of the terrorism events that they had there, they've got tremendous experience in this field. But also information. I think the key to success in this battle is intelligence and information. And we must maintain the bridges and the relationships both ways to be able to receive and to be able to provide. And I think that is key and essential. And I intend to, as I said, I have a really reputation for being able to build relationships, but I feel that I really don't need to do that. My colleagues in NCTC and in the intelligence community right now have very deep and very broad relationships with our partners, with our allies, and I intend to capitalize that and continue to do that, but I also recognize that we really can't do this alone without them, and to not rely on our partners would be a mistake.
Let me drill down on more of a technical question. You used to be head of the NCTC's Directorate of Special Operations Planning. Will you commit to, we get kind of into jurisdictional challenges here, but we really need, this committee needs those DSOP documents to perform our oversight functions, and particularly since this is mostly funded out of the NIP. Will you commit to work with us in making sure that this committee has access to those documents on a going forward basis?
Yes, Senator, as you know, from the Intelligence Reform and Terrorist Prevention Act, the Director of Strategic Operational Planning is tasked by the President and works for the President and the Executive Office of the President. I'm acutely aware and will do everything in my power to make sure that this committee provides oversight, and I will ensure that I will provide all the information necessary to this committee.
Well, again, Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you, and I want to thank both the witnesses for their long-term service to to our country and to keeping Americans safe. You're going to take on very important jobs at a very important time. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. Great to have both of you here for these two really critically important jobs. Admiral Maguire, when we were by the office the other day, we talked a little bit about the importance of using automation to modernize the way the NCTC narrows down the information that analysts should be looking at. What do you see as the future of that, and what kind of particular thing would you want this committee, as it supports you in that effort, to understand why that matters, that the automation effort, some level of artificial intelligence or
Yes, Senator Blunt.
Step up?
The main thing that I've heard from the workforce in my time engaging with those professionals in NCTC is the challenge with the volume of information that we have. As you know, NCTC is involved in watch listing and other in the terrorist identity data environment, where there are literally millions of parts of information in there. And in order to query it, sometimes it takes longer than it needs to be. In addition to that, most of the information in that data bank right now is biographical in nature. And as we move more to biometric information, we will need additional resources to be able to go and insert the biometric information, because the biographical information can be spoofed. You can have a false name, a false passport, a false identity, but it's tough to spoof the biometrics. So as we go into the 21st century systems, we need to make sure that we have things that are readily available that the analyst can query and receive in a very, very timely manner, because sometimes time is of the essence. And right now, I think that the systems we have are good. But as we look to the future and shifting to biometrics, I think that we're also going to need some support and resources for the computers that we need to do that. But mostly, I feel it's critically important to let the computers compute. And right now, there's an awful lot of human intervention. And when you have human intervention, there's also an opportunity for human error.
So the more the computers compute, the more the analysts can analyze?
Well, yes, sir. The more they can analyze, and also we might be able to achieve some efficiencies in manpower if we can allow the processing to do that for us.
So, Ms. McCarthy, Senator Warner and I represent the two big installations for National Geospatial. We got a chance to see your work there as the Chief Operating Officer, so at least for me, I've had more of an opportunity to look at what you do on a day-to-day, or what you're capable of on a day-to-day basis. Certainly, the job you're taking is sort of an intersection of diplomacy and intelligence. As we look at what China is doing, the aggressive efforts in China to, particularly the aggressive technical efforts, you want to comment on whether that, in your opinion, is in line with a state just trying to advance itself economically, or does that indicate a more aggressive strategy on the part of China in the neighborhood they live in and in the world?
Senator, thank you for your question. I will tell you, consistent with the rest of the intelligence community right now, I believe China is one of our biggest focus areas. It certainly should be, in terms of the threat now and a threat looking into the future. So I know, should I be confirmed for this position at INR, that we will absolutely look at investing the resources that are necessary to continue to address this issue from a foreign policy perspective. I'll tell you, given my experience at NGA, INR also has a role in geography and mapping and working in the development of foreign policy. They have an Office of the Geographer, and that is a part of INR. And so I'm actually very excited to be able to work with those folks and to understand more of their support to the policy area, specifically as it relates to China, and to work my connections with the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Maguire, I enjoyed my time with you in the office, and I've been thinking about it, and I just want you to know what I treasure about the agency, because I read its intelligence. I appreciate the forward-leaning nature of some of it, And the fact that over the years, it's not necessary that all intelligence agencies agree, and that I got a somewhat very positive and good perspective from the intelligence overall. I don't want to see that blunted. I appreciate the independence of the agency from other agencies. You're a Navy SEAL. I assume you're strong and independent, and I hope this will become and be a strong and independent agency. Would you comment, please?
Well, yes, Senator. To me, I think the Senate did a wonderful job with the Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act and giving the authorities to the center. But look at the director of the National Counterterrorism Center really as the honest broker. And as you said, I think that there will be times when there might be differences with the Intelligence Committee, community on opinion. I think that if that's the case, I mean, NCTC's job is to analyze all intelligence and then make the best recommendation. But if you get to a point where you've got two members of the IC, perhaps with various viewpoints, I think both of those need to be presented. NCTC exists because prior to 9/11, as you know, the FBI and the CIA did their own intelligence, and the White House had to sort it out. NCTC's job is to receive all the intelligence and to sort it out. So I'll do my utmost to do that. And when it comes to leadership, ma'am, you can count on my leadership at the Center to do the best I can to make sure that differences are resolved and we have a coordinated, staffed effort and presented to both the executive branch and to the legislative branch.
Well, let me thank you for that. I meant to ask it in the office and really didn't. But you're on the record. This is very important to me.
Yes, Senator.
Because I really prize your products, and I want you to know that. And if they're slightly different, for me, that's important. And it gives, I think, the oversight body an opportunity to look more deeply into something. So I hope you'll continue that independent tradition, and I suspect you will.
Yes, Senator.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Lang.
Mr. Chairman, thank you to both of you. Thank you for stepping back up again. It is a difficult decision because you know what you're walking into in many ways, because you've both served in the government before, and especially going through the nomination process where they ask you to get everything in the world you've ever done, said, thought, or been, and to form a list of that to be able to put that on the public record is no simple thing to be able to do, and I appreciate you doing the work on that. Mr. Maguire, let me start with you. I want to ask you about specific questions. We've worked before with Nick Rasmussen, who was always very open with us and was very engaged with us when we asked questions and gave us great detail. When he was leaving, he made a comment about that he was concerned about analytical lanes in the road for NCTC and trying to be able to make sure that we have clear lanes in the road and everyone kind of knows their job and only does theirs. But also we're careful on where we have overlap to be able to solve those problems. Help me understand where you're picking this up and running with the ball at that point, trying to deal with the analytical lanes in the road.
Well, Senator Langford, I think that what we need to do is take a good look at redundancies. Resources are very, very precious, and
Right.
if we have overlap and dual, then that needs to be addressed. I think that lanes in the road are critically important, but also different members of the intelligence community bring a different culture to their assessment as well. So at the National Counterterrorism Center, as you know, we receive, we analyze, and integrate all intelligence possessed. So as far as the lanes in the road, I see two things. One, as we go forward, realizing that there are other priorities right now that are being raised in the counterterrorism community and the infrastructure might perhaps be put on the back burner right now. So I think that what we need to do is make sure that we reduce redundancies, maximize resources, and stay in the lane of the road. But if there is double tap, I think it's also not a bad thing to have a co-author opinion presented to the committee.
By the way, which I'd agree, the redundancy is helpful to be able to get it, but every time we do redundancy, that also means we're not paying for something else that needs to be done.
Yes, Senator.
So the balance that this committee will have as we walk through the process, and the insight that we'll need from you is we have redundancy in this area. We could use those resources in another area more efficiently. You're going to see those more than we will. And the polite thing to say is we just have a different culture, and we're going to bring a different perspective to it, and it's helpful to have multiple perspectives when you're making policy decisions, and I agree. The difficult thing to do is to say, we have redundancy here, we need the resources in another place. We're underfunded in this area, and we could use the help there.
Yes, Senator, I have the benefit of being the Resource Director of Strategic Assessments for United States Special Operations Command from 2001 to 2004. So I realize how do I identify requirements and make sure that we have the appropriate resources against that. If confirmed by the Senate, what I intend to do is get smart, realize and take a good look. What are the highest priorities that we have within the National Counterterrorism Center and the IC, aligning the manpower and the resources to that, and taking a look at where we can take risk. And if there is redundancy, obviously I agree with you. We can't afford to have redundancy, and then we need to make a decision.
The size of the directorates that are there in your responsibility, are you concerned about the size of any one of them? Do you think that there's one that needs to be larger, smaller when you're going into this?
Senator, I think that I know that there might have been some criticism on how did the National Counterterrorism Center get to be the size it is. And I've discussed that with the acting director and the other folks in the center. And to my response to that is that the size of the force is, the size of the workforce is appropriately because of the tasks that we've had. When I was there in 2009, we had about 700 people at the National Counterterrorism Center, but we all remember in December of 2009 when we had the underwear bomber that tried to blow up the aircraft over Detroit. As a result of that, then we stood up the Pursuit Group, which is about 100 people. In addition to that, we've also had additional requirements for watch listing and terrorist identity data environment. And with that requirement, we had to place the additional resources. So to me, I think it's appropriate. But once again, Senator, if confirmed, I'll get in there, I'll get smart, I'll take a good hard look. And then if I have to make some tough decisions, I understand that I will.
We want to help you with that and be through the process. Again, we need NCTC to do a great job for the benefit of the entire country.
Yes,
we need that wisdom and insight that's there. We need it also to be as efficient as possible because every dollar we spend in redundancy or waste in an area is another dollar we're not spending somewhere else.
Yes, Senator.
Two more quick comments. Mr. McCarthy, quick question for you. You've been in government work, then you've stepped outside to do a think tank, and now you have the disadvantage of being in the think tank presenting ideas. Now you have to implement those. So what are you bringing in that mode that comes from the outside, from the think tank, that you look at immediately and say, this is something I need to apply?
So thank you, Senator. There's a couple of areas. I'm working for a nonprofit now, and then I also ran a think tank a few years ago. And from those experiences, I'm actually bringing, I think, two sort of, I understand these areas better than I did before when I was in government. While at the Intelligence and National Security Alliance, we are the IC's think tank, and so we brought together the public, private, and academic sectors to focus on some tough challenges that were usually posed by the Office of the DNI or other senior leadership across the IC, to include acquisition reform or security clearance reform, and to provide a table where you can have that sort of discussion, I think is going to be very beneficial as we look at state INR's role in analytic outreach and the fact that it is required. It supports not only the State Department, but the rest of the IC, and bringing together the best in academia, the best in the private sector, to also talk about some big issue areas that will affect foreign policy. So that's one area where I have some strength. In my current position at Nobless as the Vice President for Intelligence and Analytics, my focus primarily is looking at the tools and resources that can be used to help the analyst. So that includes artificial intelligence and working with data science. And so I know firsthand, with a little investment, what we can do in terms of providing new capabilities to support our analysts.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I, too, enjoyed very much visiting with both of you, and my colleagues have been talking about the importance of speaking truth to power, and the White House apparently considers, when you all stand up for truth, that this is somehow going rogue. This is their analysis of it. I consider it patriotism and duty, and I was pleased to meet with both of you. And I want to take a particular example, the travel ban, and walk through with you, Mr. Maguire, how you would go about handling this. The executive order refers repeatedly to the DNI, and it requires a number of assessments from the Director of National Intelligence. And these are assessments where the DNI could look to the Director of the National Counterterrorism Center for counsel. So this is a travel ban, 7 times refers to the DNI. How are you going to, if you're asked for your counsel on the travel ban, how are you going to make sure that any assessment is made independent of political pressure?
Senator Wyden, thanks for the question, and that was one that I did ask the staff for a little bit of guidance before I appeared before this committee today. And I was informed by Russ Travers and my colleagues, or my potential colleagues at the National Counterterrorism Center, that the travel ban, or regardless of the travel ban, it doesn't matter what country anybody who's requesting entry into the United States is from. The process is the same, and anybody who's requesting enter into the United States, it goes through a rigorous check within the National Counterterrorism Center to look for a nexus in counterterrorism. And I've asked specifically, would there be any change in the process with that? And they said, everybody's the same, no matter what country you come from, whether they're on the travel ban or whether they're from an ally. If they're coming and they're requesting, then the process is absolutely the same for everyone, no matter where they come from. And to me, that's the way it's got to be. We just have to make sure that we are deliberate and we just treat everybody equally. So, but the process is the process, and I think the process is very deliberate, and I think the process is very thorough. And I don't see any reason to change that just because of the travel ban. And I think that the folks who've done that for a living right now at NCTC, DHS, State Department, and everybody else have done a very good job.
I appreciate your statement that you want to do this by the book. This is a very politicized executive order. So I'm sure we're going to have further discussions about it. And I don't think the executive order refers to the DNI by osmosis. There's a reason for it. I think your counsel is probably going to be asked about this, and it is going to be in a highly pressurized, politicized situation. Let me ask you one other question. You all are responsible for TIDE, a database of known or suspected terrorists with over 1.5 million people in it, including 16,000 U.S. persons. I would be the first to say this performs useful functions and valuable intelligence as a tool. At the same time, my view is security and liberty aren't supposed to be mutually exclusive. We're supposed to do both. So how would you, if confirmed, make sure that we get the valuable intelligence while at the same time not pulling innocent Americans into this database?
Senator Wyden, the National Counterterrorism Center in particular, the folks who work in TIDE have got a very disciplined process. They've been trained and they work closely to make sure that we are adhering to the law. We also have a very good legal and a team that makes sure that we are in compliance. For the number of folks that are in there had to be a terrorism nexus. There is an annual audit in TIDE that is conducted by those in the National Counterterrorism Center. And if they find something that's in that center that should not be, then that individual or that process is removed. So to me, I look at two things. One, my job potentially as the director of the National Counterterrorism Center, if confirmed, is to do everything I can to make sure that I keep the country safe. In addition to that, as an American, I need to make sure that we stay true to our American values and protect civil liberties and our rights, and I intend to do that.
I'll ask you some more questions about that. One question for you, Ms. McCarthy. When the CIA ran its torture program, it told our ambassadors that they couldn't discuss it with anybody at the State Department. Now, it's INR's job to support our ambassadors and make sure that the department reviews intelligence activities, including covert actions. Can you tell us, consistent with the fact that this is an open session, how are you going to make sure that happens?
Senator, thank you for your question. That is a very important function that INR serves, is to ensure that our that our ambassadors understand their roles in intelligence oversight, and because they play a very important role in actually concurring or non-concurring with these sorts of operations, and I will take that job very seriously and ensure that INR continues to provide that training and regular intelligence update on a 7/24 basis to ensure that they know everything they need to know in making these decisions that are based on risk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Congratulations to both of you on your nominations. And Admiral, it's good to visit with you yesterday. And as I told you then, the fact that you come highly recommended by Admiral McRaven, and I know worked side by side with him for maybe 35 years.
Yes, sir.
Has a lot of significance to me. But I appreciate the chance to visit a little bit yesterday. But you talked about your long-term service in the military and the fact you've developed very good relationships with others like the Chief of Staff, the SecDef, and others. Obviously, your role at CTC will be different. You'll be focused on terrorism threats as opposed to, let's say, existential threats to the United States government. How do you view that in the larger context of national security? As a isolated focus, or is it somehow is there a continuum when you look at the range of threats confronting the United States?
Well, Senator Corden, I look at it this way. I've got close personal relationships, as you know, with the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman, the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, and others. The JSOC commander, the SOCOM commander, the CENTCOM commander. So as far as that side, the part of the House that's really doing the kinetic work, I've got very close relationships. As the director of the National Counterterrorism Center, and also as really the director of strategic operational planning in the whole of government, I need to go out and make sure that I have the relationships and capitalize on the relationships that are already there with the other members of the interagency as well as the legislative branch, and to bring the whole of government to that. So I think that, as I said, statutes give you authority, but trust and partnerships produce results, and leadership is all about results. So I intend to, not take for granted the relationships I have already, but actually focus on renewing and building relationship with the other leaders and the other members of the intelligence community to make sure that we have a whole of government approach in this counterterrorism enterprise.
Before 9/11, or I should say after 9/11, the 9/11 Commission documented the stovepipes that we had, particularly between law enforcement and our intelligence community in identifying security threats and sharing of information across the government. Sometimes I worry because the intelligence community is so large with 17 different components, and now post 9/11 with new layers of responsibility like the ODNI, that we are creating more bureaucracy and stovepipes within the intelligence community. Are those concerns justified in your view or not?
I think you've always got to be careful and be mindful that people have a tendency sometimes not to share. But I think that the Intelligence Reform and Terrorist Prevention Act did a very good job of giving the authorities to the National Counterterrorism Center, as the primary organization in the United States for analyzing and integrating intelligence acquired or actually possessed by the United States. The job of the National Counterterrorism Center is not only to possess it, but to ensure that all stakeholders, everybody who has a need to know and a requirement to do their job, whether they're the kinetic side of the House or the non-kinetic side of the House, has access to and receives the information. So I think that you must always be mindful. The lessons of 9/11 are still clear to me. I grew up in New York City. As a young boy, I watched the Twin Towers go up. 3 weeks after I got my first star, I saw them go down. So it's very, very real to me. And I think it's absolutely essential that we share within the intelligence community, stovepipes, but also to Vice Chairman Warner's question earlier. We need to make sure that we also share with our partners and our allies, because you never know where the information is going to come from, and information and intelligence are key and essential to the success in this campaign.
Admiral and Ms. McCarthy, I'd like to get both of you to respond to this. Do you view it as part of your responsibility to develop a consensus
when it comes to intelligence, or because rarely is intelligence a lead pipe cinch. In other words, it's rarely for certain. That's why the intelligence community talks about we assess this, that, and the other. We have this level of confidence and the like. But what is the, Ms. McCarthy, maybe you could start. What's your role in trying to develop consensus, or do you feel like you have to present competing points of view and opinions and perspectives from different segments of the intelligence community?
Senator Cornyn, INR has a long history of being an independent actor and providing independent analysis, and many times has been at odds with, dating back to the Vietnam War, has been at odds with some of its counterparts in the IC. The good news is that the IC is an environment where you can have those discussions. There's processes in place to ensure that competing views are represented, whether they are in briefs that go to the President Daily Brief, or mostly through the National Intelligence estimates through the NIC. And so there's always an opportunity to provide competing views. So I don't believe, should I be confirmed, that my role at INR will be getting consensus for the position that we may take on an intelligence issue, but certainly ensuring that it's represented and heard and representing in those documents that are shared across the IC.
Admiral?
Senator Cornyn, I think that's why we're here. When I was in a leadership position, I always asked my staff, I want something that's well-staffed, and I want a coordinated, recommended opinion from the staff, not give it to me and have it sorted out. As we know, for the lessons from 9/11, we had different departments and agencies providing the information to the White House, and the White House had to sort it out. That didn't work so good. So the obligation to make sure that there's a concerted and a focused, recommended, and coordinated one to both the executive branch and to the legislative branch is one that I take seriously and will do my darndest to deliver.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I want to thank you for your willingness to serve. Second, I want to emphasize that you two are taking on two of the most important jobs in the United States government. The responsibility is awesome and incredibly important. In an age of terrorism, and we are not out of the age of terrorism, intelligence is the first line of defense. And if we don't know what's going to happen, it's going to be very difficult to prevent. So intelligence is incredibly important. I'm going to now ask a couple of questions that may sound topical, but my colleagues will testify that I've been asking these same questions for 5 years. Have nothing to do with who's president. The grave danger in intelligence is shading the data to meet the perceived policy needs of whoever's in charge. And this goes back as far as we can go. In fact, I would commend to you H.R. McMaster's book, Dereliction of Duty, the incredibly insightful account of what happened in Vietnam and the failure in many ways of communication to the higher echelons, to the policymakers. So, Admiral Maguire, one of your strongest qualifications may also be a disadvantage, and that is your long career in the military, where chain of command, following orders is an absolutely important part of the job. That's what you've been trained to do for 30-plus years. Assure me that you are not going to follow orders, that you are going to chase the intelligence where it leads, report it as it appears, and not shade any information because of pressure, and it may not even be overt pressure. Often it's human nature to want to give the boss what they want. So it doesn't have to be shade the material. You've got to work within your agency to counteract the human tendency to provide information that's pleasing to those higher up. Talk to me about that issue.
Well, Senator King, as I said, I don't need any reminder about the stakes that the nation is under. I've lost friends in this fight, and I realize that it's very real. I concur with your comment that although we've made tremendous strides in the last 17 years, we've still posed tremendous threats to the country. My job as the director, if confirmed, is to make sure that I provide truthful and accurate information. And if not, then the stakes could be we make a decision that is incorrect and it could cause harm to the nation and to our interests. In addition to that, to lead the workforce. If I have a workforce that has an opinion, for me to color or change that opinion before it goes up above my level to more senior people, I think I would completely lose the workforce. But most importantly, if I colored any judgment or provided any information to anybody that was not truthful and accurate, and something happened, then I also have to live with that. And I've been to Arlington National Cemetery and to other cemeteries around the country, and I realized that, I'm here to make sure that I do my darndest to defend the nation and to do what's right, and I intend to do that, sir.
Thank you. I really appreciate that, and I look forward to working with you in that capacity.
Thank you, Senator King.
Ms. McCarthy, the same kind of question. A great quote from one of your predecessors, Mr. Ford, said, "The analysts at INR are a curmudgeon-like group who delight in being different and getting to the body of something and not caring what other people think." That was Carl Ford back in 2004. I'm not sure you're sufficiently curmudgeon-like. Assure me on that point.
Oh, I am curmudgeon-like. That's Senator, again, should I be confirmed, I think INR, that's their brand, is independent analysis. They have a long and very respected history of not being persuaded by those who may take on positions differently.
Many people feel in Iraq they got it better than anybody else.
I think the record shows that they did get it better than anyone else, and they went through the IC's processes to ensure that certainly that information was shared, and then it's up to the policymaker to determine what they're going to do with that.
One line, though, your last sentence of your opening statement, "Our intelligence activities must support our foreign policy and national security objectives." I hope you mean by providing good intelligence, not providing justification for objectives that somebody else has set.
Absolutely, sir. This is not to shade the intelligence to support our foreign policy objectives, but to provide our foreign policy decision makers with the truth.
Well, the other piece in your answers, and again, it's good news, bad news. You mentioned the proximity to the Secretary of State, that you use that term, proximity. That's good news. That means you're close to policymakers. The bad news is you could be subject to the kind of pressure, subtle, not necessarily overt, to shade the data. Give me your thoughts.
So, Senator, again, I think all of my predecessors have had that relationship with the Secretary and have had a history of not necessarily bending to political or positions that may not be in line with what the intelligence shows. So again, I believe that my access to the Secretary and policymakers is going to help me understand more about what their priorities are so that I can then work within INR and across the intelligence community to ensure that collections are then focused on these areas and that so that we can provide him or her with the truth. And so proximity is more about being able to guide collections than it is about providing them what they want to hear.
Well, I appreciate, again, both of you being willing to take on this job. If you're ever in doubt, the actions of Dan Coates last week are a demonstration of how these jobs should be done. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator King. And I will say that Senator King's questioning was a first for me. It's the first time I've ever heard a nominee question because they weren't curmudgeon enough to match that of the senator.
I said I worried. I also said in the hearing I worried that Dan Coates was too nice a guy. So,
Vice Chairman.
I would simply say, I think you've heard from a lot of us. We're counting on you both to be straightforward, speak truth to power, make sure that you're not influenced by political. I think you both bring remarkable records, and I just want to go on record, Mr. Chairman, as I hope we can move these nominees as quickly as possible, and appreciate you holding this hearing.
Mark, thank you. It's the intent of the chair to actually do that, to move these nominees hopefully out of committee next week with the committee's help. And I want to thank, for planning purposes, thank all of you, but for planning purposes, any member of the committee who wishes to submit questions for the record after today's hearing, please do so by the close of business today. I just want to reiterate that to both of you. Thank you. Joe, I got to tell you that I am a morning prolific reader. I come in early, try try to get it out of the way before our day job starts. The questions that you heard on size and, Ms. McCarthy, the amount of analysts, trust me, if you're in Washington today, you're an analyst. If you're not employed, something is really, really bad wrong, because we have hired a boatload across all the agencies. And when this committee sort of looks at the landscape and sees all of those, we automatically respond to every agency. Have you looked at your size? Have you looked at the requirements? Does it match? But I got to tell you, Joe, that, you know, any morning I could get up and I could read 6 products on the same thing. And I don't look at it and say that that's not valuable to have 6 different analysts. But do remember that the root product they work from is the product that comes out of NCTC. So the accuracy on the front end is that much more important, because you've got other folks that are dicing and slicing that. And it's those products that find its way to my desk, to the president's desk, to the vice chairman's desk, that influence then the policy decisions that we make. So you're right. I'm grateful to you. Accuracy is incredibly important. If we're going to screw up, let's all screw up together. But let's make sure that it was our intent to get it right. And that way, whether it's INR or any other piece of the IC community, the basis with which they have analyzed product and produced reports for policymakers comes from credible, quality, foundational reporting that's done by NCTC. So I want to thank both of you for your willingness to serve, for your willingness to expose yourself to our committee members. We will move your nominations as quickly as the Senate can possibly do, which is not as fast as we might wish, but the Vice Chairman and I will try to facilitate that as fast as we can. Once again, thank you to you and your families. This hearing's adjourned.